He brought his mistress to his pregnant wife's funeral. The lawyer read her will and revealed his true identity, a complete 60-minute TTS-optimized drama story. Hook plus value proposition plus CTA. What would you do if your husband brought his mistress to your funeral? 400 people watched in horror as Nathan Cross walked into his pregnant wife's memorial service with another woman on his arm. She wore red, not burgundy, not wine, not any shade that could be excused as a mistake. Bright, arterial red, the color of blood against snow. His wife, Grace, was not even cold in her casket, 8 months pregnant when she died. Their daughter never took her first breath. But here is what nobody in that chapel knew. Grace had discovered the affair 6 weeks before she died, and while investigating her cheating husband, she uncovered something far more terrifying than lipstick on his collar. The man she married was not who he claimed to be. His real name was not Nathan Cross, and the real Nathan Cross had been dead for 9 years. Grace could not escape her marriage alive. The prenup made sure of that. The isolation made sure of that. The danger she faced every single day made sure of that. But she spent her final weeks building a trap that would destroy him from beyond the grave. When the lawyer opened her will, every secret came flooding out. The DNA results, the hidden identity, the murders nobody knew about. This is the story of a woman who refused to be silenced, even in death. But more than that, this is a story about recognizing the warning signs before it is too late, about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, about building evidence instead of confronting emotion, about protecting yourself and the people you love from predators who wear charming masks. Every woman needs to hear this story, not because it will scare you, because it will prepare you. If you are going through something difficult right now, if you suspect someone in your life is not who they claim to be, if you have ever felt trapped in a relationship and did not know how to escape, stay with me until the end. I promise you, the justice Grace delivered will leave you breathless, and the lessons she taught us might just save your life. Before we begin, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another story like this one. And if at any point this story moves you, drop a comment below and tell me what hit you hardest. I read every single one. Now let us begin. Chapter 1, The Red Dress Entrance. The sound came first, a crystal champagne flute slipping from trembling fingers. The explosion of glass against marble echoed through Westbrook Memorial Chapel like a gunshot, sharp and final. No one moved to clean it up. No one could move at all. 400 mourners stood frozen in place, their breath caught in their throats, their eyes fixed on the entrance where the impossible had just walked through the door. Rachel Hayes felt the champagne splash against her ankle, felt the cold liquid seeping into her black heels, but she could not look down. She could only stare at the man walking toward them with a woman who was definitely not his wife, because his wife was in the casket at the front of the room. White lilies filled every corner of the sacred space. Their fragrance hung heavy in the air, sweet and suffocating, the smell of death dressed up as beauty. Thousands of dollars worth of flowers surrounded a mahogany casket polished to a mirror shine. Photographs of Grace Thornton lined the walls. Grace at her Stanford graduation, mortarboard tilted at a playful angle. Grace on her wedding day, radiant in white lace, eyes shining with hope. Grace holding up a positive pregnancy test, tears of joy streaming down her face, one hand already resting on her flat belly. Grace Thornton, 31 years old, 8 months pregnant when she died, and her husband had just walked into her funeral with his mistress on his arm. Nathan Cross stood in the doorway like a man arriving at a charity gala, not a memorial service. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. His designer black suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. His jaw was clean-shaven, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. The woman beside him was stunning in the way that made other women feel invisible. 27 years old, dark hair cascading over bare shoulders, perfect makeup that took an hour to look effortless, a figure that turned heads in any room. And she was wearing red, not burgundy, not wine, not maroon or crimson or any shade that could be excused as a fashion mistake or poor judgment. Red, bright, traffic light red, the color of stop signs and fire trucks and blood on white sheets. The whispers began immediately, spreading through the chapel like wildfire through dry grass. That is his mistress, at his pregnant wife's funeral. Grace is not even cold in the ground. How dare he? How dare he bring her here? The woman in red did not seem to notice the whispers, or perhaps she simply did not care. She walked beside Nathan with her chin held high, her red stilettos clicking against the marble floor. Her lips curved in a small smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing and enjoyed every second of it. William Thornton stood frozen at his daughter's casket. He was 64 years old, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. He had started with a single rental property and transformed it into Thornton Properties, one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast. He had survived hostile takeovers that would have destroyed lesser men. He had weathered market crashes that bankrupted his competitors. He had endured personal tragedies that would have broken most people in half. Nothing had ever stopped William Thornton, but this stopped him. His security detail moved toward Nathan, three large men in dark suits with earpieces and grim expressions, ready to remove the intruder by force. William raised one hand without turning around. The men halted instantly. His face was a study in controlled devastation, the kind of expression that costs something to maintain. Every muscle locked in place, every emotion buried beneath iron will. Only his eyes betrayed him. They burned with something that went beyond anger, beyond grief, beyond anything that had a name in the English language. Nathan guided the woman in red down the center aisle as if they were arriving at a society event. He nodded at acquaintances he passed. He offered small, sad smiles to people who had known Grace since childhood. He played the grieving widower with the skill of an Oscar-winning actor who had rehearsed his role for years. They sat in the front row, the row reserved for immediate family. The woman in red crossed her legs, her stiletto bouncing slightly with each breath. She looked around the chapel with barely concealed boredom, as if wondering how long this tedious affair would take before she could leave. Jonathan Thornton, Grace's older brother, approached from the side aisle. He was 35, with his father's build and his mother's temper. Right now, he was very much provoked. "You need to leave," Jonathan said, his voice low but sharp as broken glass. "Now?" Nathan looked up with an expression of wounded dignity. "I am Grace's husband. I have every right to be here. That woman is not welcome at my sister's funeral. That woman is my guest." Nathan's voice carried just enough to reach the nearby pews, and I would appreciate some respect for my grief. I have just lost my wife and my unborn child. This is the hardest day of my life. The audacity of the statement hit Jonathan like a physical blow. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but his mother's voice cut through the red haze of rage before he could move. "Jonathan." Not here. Evelyn Thornton had somehow crossed the room without anyone noticing. Her face was pale as paper, her eyes red-rimmed from days of crying, but her voice was steel-forged in fire. "We will not make a scene at my daughter's funeral. That is what he wants. We will not give it to him." Jonathan looked at his mother, looked at Nathan, looked at the woman in her obscene red dress. He stepped back. The tension remained, thick enough to taste, but the immediate crisis had passed. For now, in the third row, Rachel Hayes gripped the wooden pew until her knuckles turned white. She had been Grace's best friend for 13 years, college roommates for 4 years, bridesmaids at each other's weddings, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and knew each other's deepest secrets. Rachel knew things. Grace had told her everything in those final weeks, and she knew what was coming. She watched Nathan settle into his seat with the satisfied posture of a man who had won something. Watched the woman in red check her phone beneath the cover of her designer clutch. Watched the Thornton family struggle to maintain their composure while their hearts shattered into smaller and smaller pieces. I always knew there was something wrong with him, Rachel thought, from the very first time Grace introduced us. Something behind his eyes that did not match his smile. But I never imagined this. None of us could have imagined this. Lesson 1, trust your instincts. Here is the first thing I want you to take from this story. When someone in your life gives you a bad feeling, when your gut tells you something is wrong, even though you cannot explain why, listen to that voice. Do not dismiss it as jealousy or paranoia or overreaction. Rachel sensed something off about Nathan from day one. She mentioned it to Grace once, gently, carefully. Grace dismissed it as her friend being overprotective. That dismissal cost Grace everything. Your instincts evolved over millions of years to protect you from predators. They recognize patterns your conscious mind cannot see. They detect micro-expressions and inconsistencies that slip past your rational filters. When your gut screams warning, do not argue with it. Investigate. Ask questions. Pay attention. Because predators like Nathan count on you ignoring that voice. They count on your politeness, your benefit of the doubt, your willingness to explain away red flags because confrontation feels uncomfortable. Do not give them that advantage. Now let us go back 6 weeks before the funeral, to the day Grace Thornton's world shattered for the first time. Chapter 2, The Locked Drawer. 6 weeks before her death, Grace Thornton's morning began like any other Tuesday in October. She woke at 7:15 to an empty bed. The sheets beside her were cold, meaning Nathan had left hours ago. Business meeting in the city. He had texted at 5:30. Did not want to wake you. Love you? She had smiled at the message then, pressed her hand against her swollen belly and felt their daughter kick in response. Everything is going to be perfect, she had whispered to the baby. Your daddy works so hard for us. We are so lucky to have him. She had no idea how wrong she was. Grace made herself tea in the gleaming kitchen of their $5 million home in the suburbs. Decaffeinated Earl Grey because the pregnancy book said caffeine was risky. She added honey from the local farmer's market, the kind Nathan teased her about, but always made sure to stock. By 9 o'clock, Grace was restless. The house was too quiet. The nursery was finished. Every detail perfect. The thank you notes from the baby shower were written and mailed. The hospital bag was packed and waiting by the front door. For the first time in months, Grace had nothing to do. That was when she decided to organize Nathan's home office. It was not something she normally did. Nathan was particular about his space, almost territorial. He kept the door closed when he worked. He had asked her, gently but firmly, to leave his filing alone because he had a system. But Grace was nesting. Her doctor had explained that pregnant women often felt compelled to clean, organize, and prepare. Some ancient instinct driving them to make everything perfect before the baby arrived. Nathan would understand. He always understood. She started with the bookshelves, dusting leather-bound volumes that Nathan collected but never seemed to read. Then the filing cabinet, color-coded folders arranged alphabetically, tax returns, investment statements, property records, everything perfectly organized, everything exactly where it should be. Then his desk. It was a massive antique piece, mahogany with brass handles, supposedly once owned by a railroad baron. Nathan had paid $60,000 for it at auction. Grace had thought it was excessive. Nathan had said it was an investment in his image. She wiped down the surface with a microfiber cloth, organized the pens, straightened the photograph of their wedding day in its silver frame. That was when she noticed the drawer, a small drawer on the left side, nestled between two larger ones. She had seen it 100 times but never paid attention. It was just a drawer, but when she tried to open it, it would not budge. Locked. Grace stared at the locked drawer for a long moment. A strange feeling crept over her, something cold and uneasy settling in her stomach like ice water. Why would Nathan lock a drawer in his home office? She tried to dismiss the thought. Everyone had private things. Everyone deserved some space that was their own. She was being paranoid, but the feeling would not go away. She looked for the key, checked the desk surface, checked the other drawers, all of which opened easily and contained nothing remarkable. checked the bookshelf, checked the coat rack where Nathan sometimes hung his jacket. Nothing. She went upstairs to their bedroom, checked his nightstand, his dresser, the closet where his clothes hung in perfect order, arranged by color and season because Nathan was meticulous about everything. In his sock drawer, beneath a row of Italian cashmere socks that cost $50 a pair, she found a small silver key. Her heart was beating faster now. Some part of her, some instinct buried deep, was screaming at her to stop. Put the key back. Close the drawer. Never think about it again. She went back downstairs anyway. The key fit the lock perfectly. The drawer opened. Inside was a phone. Black, sleek. The latest model, not the phone Nathan carried every day. A second phone, hidden in a locked drawer beneath $50 socks. Grace's hands trembled as she picked it up. The screen lit at her touch, asking for a passcode. She tried his usual password, their anniversary, 07192020. It worked. He had not even bothered to use a different code. The home screen appeared, messages, photos, calendar, all the normal apps. She opened the messages, and her entire world collapsed. Hundreds of conversations appeared, all with the same contact. Someone named Amber with a heart emoji next to the name. Grace sat down on the floor of her husband's office, her pregnant belly making the position awkward, and began to read. The messages spanned 3 years. 3 years of I love you and I miss you, and I cannot wait to hold you again. 3 years of I wish I could wake up next to you every morning, and soon baby soon, and she does not suspect anything. 3 years of photographs that Grace would never be able to unsee. Amber in lingerie, Amber in nothing at all, Amber in hotel beds with champagne bottles on the nightstand and rose petals scattered across white sheets. I will leave her after the baby is born. Nathan had written just 2 weeks ago, I am only staying for appearances. For the Thornton money. You know you are the only one I love. And Amber had written back, I know baby. I have always known. She is just a stepping stone. We are the real thing. Everything was a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every gentle hand on her pregnant belly. All of it, a performance, a con, a 3-year deception that Grace had been too blind and too trusting to see. She sat on that cold marble floor and felt something inside her break. Not her heart. Hearts break all the time and heal eventually. This was something deeper, something fundamental, the very foundation of who she thought she was and what she thought her life meant. All of it crumbled to dust while she sat on the floor of her husband's office. 8 months pregnant, reading love letters to another woman. Disappointment, peak 1. The discovery, Grace did not cry. She did not scream. She did not throw the phone against the wall or run upstairs to pack a bag. She was too devastated to do any of those things. She sat on the floor for 47 minutes. She counted, watching the clock on the wall tick away the seconds of her old life, knowing that when she finally stood up, she would be a different person. A woman who knew the truth. A woman who could never unknow it. Finally, she moved. She photographed every message, every picture, every damning conversation. She sent the images to a personal email address Nathan did not know about, one she had kept from before their marriage. Then she put the phone back exactly where she found it, locked the drawer, returned the key to its hiding spot beneath the cashmere socks, and she never said a word. But she was not done searching. 2 days later, still in shock, still moving through her house like a ghost, Grace returned to the office. The affair was devastating, but some instinct told her there was more. Something about the way Nathan had hidden that phone, the careful layers of secrecy, the locked drawer within a locked drawer mentality. A man hiding an affair might use a second phone, but a man hiding something worse might have more secrets to find. She searched the desk more carefully this time, pulled out every drawer, felt along the inside for hidden compartments like she had seen in movies. That was when she found it. A second locked drawer, hidden behind a false panel in the bottom left corner of the desk. She would never have noticed it if she had not been looking for exactly this kind of deception. It took her 20 minutes to find the key, taped to the underside of a filing cabinet with black electrical tape that blended into the metal. Her hands shook as she fitted the key into the lock. Her entire world cracked open as she pulled out what was inside. A passport, blue cover, United States of America. But the name inside was not Nathan Cross. Derek Cole, born August 15th, 1986, Toledo, Ohio. And the photograph was her husband's face. There was also a death certificate, official looking, state of Colorado, Nathan William Cross, date of death 9 years ago, cause of death, hiking accident in the Rocky Mountains, body never recovered, and photographs. Two young men standing together at the base of a mountain trail, backpacks on their shoulders, smiles on their faces. One was the man Grace knew as Nathan. The other was a stranger with lighter hair and an open, trusting expression. The stranger in the photograph looked kind, innocent, the type of person who believed the best in everyone, the type of person who would never see betrayal coming. Grace sat on the floor surrounded by evidence of something far worse than infidelity, and she understood. Her husband was not Nathan Cross. Her husband was Derek Cole, and Derek Cole had murdered the real Nathan Cross 9 years ago to steal his identity, his money, and his life. Chapter 3. The walls close and the next morning came too soon. Grace had not slept. She had spent the entire night in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every interaction she had ever had with the man she called her husband. Every conversation, every touch, every "I love you." All of it spoken by a murderer wearing a dead man's face. She heard Nathan come home at 6:15, heard his car pull into the garage, heard the engine shut off, heard the door open and close. She was already in their bed by then, having moved silently through the dark house minutes before, lying perfectly still under the covers, eyes closed, breathing measured and even, the performance of a woman deep in peaceful sleep. Nathan showered. She listened to the water run, listened to him hum a song she did not recognize. He was in a good mood. Of course he was. He had probably spent the night with Amber while his pregnant wife discovered that her entire marriage was built on murder and lies. He dressed, padded down the hallway, entered the bedroom smelling of expensive cologne. He leaned over her, kissed her forehead with lips that had probably kissed Amber hours before. "Love you, Ellie," he murmured, using the nickname only he used. "Get some rest. You need it for our little girl." Every cell in her body screamed. Every instinct demanded she recoil, shove him away, demand the truth. But she did not move, did not flinch, did not let a single muscle betray what she knew. "Love you too," she whispered, as if half asleep. She heard him smile, heard him walk away, heard the front door open and close, heard his car start in the driveway. Only when the engine faded into the distance did she allow herself to breathe. She ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. That day, Grace began to plan. Lesson 2, Evidence before Emotion. Here is the second critical lesson from Grace's story. When you discover betrayal, your first instinct is to confront, to scream, to demand answers and explanations and apologies. Do not. I know that sounds counterintuitive. I know the rage feels like it will consume you if you do not release it immediately. I know every fiber of your being wants to look them in the eye and watch them squirm. But confrontation without preparation is a gift to your enemy. The moment you confront, you lose control of the situation. They can deny, gaslight, destroy evidence, turn the tables and make you look crazy. But if you gather evidence first, if you document everything, if you build your case before they know you are building anything, you take away their power. Grace understood this instinctively. Despite her devastation, despite the horror of what she had discovered, she did not confront Nathan. She photographed everything, sent copies to secure locations, created a paper trail that could not be erased or denied. That decision saved her legacy. That decision brought justice from beyond the grave. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember grace. Remember that evidence is power. Remember that patience is strategy. Document first, confront later. Or in Grace's case, never confront at all. Let the evidence do the confronting for you. Grace spent the next 2 days researching her options. Every path led to a dead end. She could not run. Derek had found Nathan Cross in the Colorado wilderness and killed him without leaving a trace. He would find a pregnant woman on the run. No matter how far she went or how carefully she hid, she could not tell her father. The moment William Thornton's lawyers or security team got involved, Derek would know something had changed. He would see it in the way people looked at him, in the questions they asked, in the sudden shift of the family dynamic. And if he knew Grace had discovered the truth, what would stop him from deciding she was too dangerous to leave alive? She could not go to the police, not yet. She had a passport with a different name and a death certificate for a stranger. She had photographs of 2 men at a mountain trailhead. But she did not have proof, not the kind that would hold up in court, not the kind that would put him in prison before he could hurt her. And then there was the prenup. Grace remembered the day she signed it. She had been 26 years old, desperately in love, planning a wedding that felt like a fairy tale come true. Her father had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, standard procedure for families with significant assets. Nathan had seemed almost offended by the suggestion. "I am not marrying you for your money. Ellie, I am marrying you for you." But he had signed it anyway, graciously, as if doing her family a favor. Now Grace understood why. The terms were ironclad. If she left him, she got nothing. If he left her, she got nothing. The Thornton family assets were protected. Yes, but Grace's access to those assets was conditional on remaining in good standing with the family. And here was the cruel twist Nathan had probably counted on from the beginning. The only way Grace could access her full inheritance was if Nathan was convicted of a crime against her, or if she died. Grace sat in her kitchen, morning sun streaming through the windows, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, and she understood the trap she was in. She could not leave without losing everything. She could not stay without losing herself. She was pregnant, vulnerable, isolated, and married to a man who had killed before. Disappointment, peak 2. The prenup trap. This is what abusers do. This is what con artists and predators and wolves in sheep's clothing do. They build cages around you so slowly that you do not notice the bars going up. They isolate you from family and friends. They make you financially dependent. They ensure that by the time you realize you need to escape seems impossible. Grace Thornton was a billionaire's daughter. She had access to resources most people could only dream of. She had a loving family, loyal friends, every advantage life could offer, and still she was trapped. Because predators do not just target the weak, they target everyone. They adapt their methods to their victims. They find the vulnerabilities that exist in every human heart and exploit them with surgical precision. Nathan had not trapped Grace with violence or threats. He had trapped her with love, with charm, with a smile that made her feel like the most special woman in the world. He had made her want to trust him, and that was the cruelest trap of all. Grace made a phone call. "Rachel," she said when her best friend answered, "I need to see you. Not at my house, somewhere we have never been together. Somewhere no one would expect us to go." Rachel heard something in her voice. Fear, desperation. Something broken that had not been there before. "There is a coffee shop on Maple Street," Rachel said immediately. "The one in the old Victorian building that used to be a bookstore. I will be there in 30 minutes. Thank you." "Rachel, thank you so much." She drove carefully through the suburban streets, checking her mirrors obsessively, making sure no one was following. She took a roundabout route, doubling back twice, parking in a lot 3 blocks away from the coffee shop. She was being paranoid. She knew she was being paranoid, or maybe she was finally being smart. The coffee shop was small and dim, smelling of old books and fresh espresso, perfect for secrets. Rachel was already there, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall. Her face changed the moment she saw Grace walk through the door. "My God, Ellie, what happened to you?" Grace sat down heavily. Her pregnant belly made the small chair uncomfortable, but she did not care about comfort anymore. "I need you to listen," Grace said. "I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you to not say anything until I am finished." Rachel nodded slowly. Grace told her everything. The affair, the second phone, the 3 years of messages, the photographs she wished she could unsee. Rachel's expression shifted from concern to anger to protective fury. Then Grace told her about the other discovery, the passport in the name Derek Cole, the death certificate for Nathan William Cross, the photographs of two young men who went hiking together when only one came back alive. Rachel's face went from furious to horrified to pale as a ghost. "Ellie," she whispered when Grace finally stopped talking, "this is not just an affair. This is murder, identity theft, fraud. We need to call the police right now." Grace shook her head. "And say what my husband might be using a dead man's identity. I might be married to a murderer. They will need proof." "Rachel, real proof. Evidence that will hold up in court. And the moment Derek knows I suspect anything, the moment he thinks I might expose him, I am in danger." She put her hand on her belly, where hope kicked and turned. "We are in danger." Rachel stared at her friend. The weight of the situation settled over them like a physical thing. "Then we get proof," Rachel said finally, quietly, carefully, without him knowing. Grace almost smiled. "That is exactly what I was thinking." Chapter 4: The Investigation. Grace hired Raymond Garrett 3 days later. He was 58 years old, former FBI, with a face like crumpled leather and eyes that had seen everything the world had to offer and remained unimpressed. He came highly recommended by a divorce attorney Rachel had contacted using a friend of a friend of a friend, a chain of connections too convoluted for Derek to ever trace. Grace met Garrett in the back booth of a diner 40 miles from her home. She paid cash, left no paper trail, gave him a burner phone number that she checked from a gas station bathroom twice a day. She was learning to be paranoid, or perhaps she was learning to survive. Garrett listened to her story without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing, calculating, fitting pieces together in his mind. "The real Nathan Cross," he said finally. "Tell me everything you know about him." Grace slid a folder across the table. Everything she had found. Everything she had photographed. Everything she had been too afraid to tell anyone except Rachel. Garrett examined each document carefully. His expression never changed. "I will need 2 weeks," he said. "Maybe 3. I have contacts who can access records that civilians cannot reach. If there is evidence that connects your husband to Nathan Cross's death, I will find it. And if there is not," Garrett looked at her with something that might have been sympathy, "then you will need to decide how much danger you are willing to live with." Grace paid him $5,000 in cash. First installment, more when he delivered results. She drove home through winding mountain roads, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. She did not know it then, but she had just set in motion a chain of events that would expose not one murder, not 2, 3. 1 week later, Garrett called the burner phone. "We need to meet. I have information." Grace told Derek she was going to a prenatal yoga class. He smiled, kissed her forehead, told her to take care of their little girl. She drove 30 miles to a park in a town she had never visited. Garrett was waiting on a bench near the duck pond, feeding breadcrumbs to birds that had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of the end. "The real Nathan Cross," Garrett said without preamble. "Trust fund kid from Greenwich, Connecticut. Old money family. Degrees from Exeter and Yale. Everything handed to him since the day he was born." Grace nodded. This matched what she had found. He died in a hiking accident in the Rocky Mountains 9 years ago. Solo trip. According to official records, his body was never recovered. Search parties looked for 2 weeks before the terrain and weather forced them to give up. Solo trip. Garrett shook his head. That is what the records say. But I found something interesting. Credit card receipts from a bar in Denver. 2 months before the hiking trip. Nathan Cross and another man. Multiple visits. Large tabs. They were drinking together regularly. The other man, Derek Cole. Grace closed her eyes. Derek grew up in foster care in Ohio. No family, no money, no prospects. Bounced between group homes until he aged out at 18. After that, the trail gets interesting. Small-time cons, petty theft, nothing violent on record, but nothing honest either. He met Nathan at that bar in Denver. They became friends. Nathan liked having someone who was not part of his privileged world. Someone real, as he apparently described Derek to his Connecticut friends. Garrett paused, letting the weight of what he was about to say settle over them. Derek liked Nathan's money, his trust fund, his family name, his easy access to a life that Derek had been denied since birth. They went hiking together in late August. 2 men going into the wilderness. Only one came back alive. Grace felt sick. Derek told the rangers that Nathan slipped on a rocky trail and fell into a ravine. Said he tried to save him but could not reach him. The body was too far down to retrieve, and a storm was coming, making recovery impossible. And they believed him. Why would they not? He was distraught, traumatized. A man who had just watched his friend die. There was no reason to suspect foul play. Garrett pulled out another folder. But here is where it gets interesting. 2 years after Nathan's death, he miraculously reappeared. Grace leaned forward. He contacted his mother, Virginia Cross, wealthy widow, lives in Greenwich. He claimed to have survived the fall, said he suffered a head injury that caused amnesia, wandered in the wilderness for weeks before being found by a family living off-grid, slowly recovered his memories over the course of 2 years. That is insane. No one would believe that story. Virginia wanted to believe. Her son was back from the dead. Her miracle. She did not question the inconsistencies, did not look too closely at the small differences in appearance, the subtle changes in mannerism. She welcomed him home, gave him access to his trust fund, introduced him back into society as Nathan Cross, returned from the dead, and Derek became Nathan. Garrett nodded. He has been living as Nathan Cross for 6 years, spending Nathan's money, charming Nathan's social circle. And 3 years ago, targeting you. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. He researched you for months before you met. I found evidence of searches, social media monitoring, attendance records at charity events where you were scheduled to appear. He knew your schedule, your interests, your vulnerabilities. That charity auction where we met, it was not coincidence. Nothing about your relationship was coincidence. Grace sat very still, processing the enormity of what she was hearing. But Garrett was not finished. There is something else, something I found while digging into Derek's background. 6 years ago, before he assumed Nathan's identity, Derek was briefly married. A woman named Linda Foster from Reno, Nevada. Grace's stomach dropped. She discovered something about him, something that made her afraid. She told her sister she was planning to leave, that her husband was not who he said he was. What happened to her? Garrett's expression was grim. She disappeared. Cold case. Body never found. Last known contact was a voicemail to her sister saying she was scared and needed to get out. That was 8 weeks before Derek showed up at Virginia Cross's door pretending to be her dead son. Grace understood then, with horrible clarity, exactly what kind of man she had married. Not just a con artist, not just an identity thief, not just one murderer, a serial killer, a man who eliminated anyone who threatened to expose his lies. And she was 8 months pregnant with his child. Chapter 5, False Hope. Grace spent the next week building her case. She contacted Virginia Cross through a carefully worded letter that revealed nothing of what she knew, only that she had concerns about some business dealings and wanted to verify certain details about Nathan's background. Virginia responded within 2 days. She was confused but willing to help. They met in Greenwich, at a tea room so exclusive that it did not have a sign on the door. Virginia Cross was 72 years old, elegant despite her age, dressed in simple black that spoke of old money and older values. She looked like a woman who had suffered and survived, which Grace supposed she had. She had lost her son twice, once to a mountain, once to a monster wearing his face. She just did not know about the second loss yet. "I am not sure what concerns you have about Nathan," Virginia said, stirring honey into her Earl Grey. "He has been nothing but wonderful since he came back to us. A little different, perhaps, but trauma changes people." Grace chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Cross, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. When Nathan returned, did you ever have moments of doubt? Moments when something felt off?" Virginia's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Why do you ask?" "Because I am married to him, and I have recently discovered some things that concern me deeply." Virginia set down her cup. The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the distance, another patron laughed at something her companion said. The sound felt like it came from another world. What kind of things? Grace told her. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The affair with Amber. The secret phone. The locked drawers and hidden keys and layers of deception. Virginia listened without interrupting. Her face went from confused to concerned, to something that looked almost like relief. When Grace finished, Virginia was silent for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "when he first came back, I told myself the differences did not matter. His voice was slightly different. His mannerisms had changed. He did not remember things he should have remembered, and he remembered things differently than I did." She looked at Grace with eyes that held 6 years of suppressed doubt. "But he was my son, back from the dead, a miracle." "What kind of mother questions a miracle?" "A smart one," Grace said gently. "A careful one. A mother who deserves to know the truth." "What are you suggesting?" Grace pulled out a small envelope. "DNA testing. Your sample compared to his. If he is really Nathan, the test will prove it and put both our minds at ease. And if he is not, then we will both have answers, and we can decide together what to do with them." Virginia stared at the envelope for a very long time. Then she took it. 3 weeks later, the results came back. Grace sat in Raymond Garrett's car in the parking lot of a shopping mall, reading the report from 3 independent laboratories. All 3 agreed. The man living as Nathan Cross shared 0 DNA with Virginia Cross or any member of the Cross family. He was not Nathan. He had never been Nathan. He was Derek Cole from Toledo, Ohio. Foster kid, con artist, murderer. And Grace finally had proof. False hope moment 1. For the first time in weeks, Grace felt something like hope. She had evidence. Real evidence. 3 laboratories, chain of custody documentation, expert witnesses who would testify to the validity of the results. She had Virginia Cross, willing to cooperate, willing to tell her story to whatever authorities needed to hear it. She had Raymond Garrett, former FBI, ready to present his findings to law enforcement in a way that would guarantee action. She had everything she needed to destroy Derek Cole. All she had to do was make one phone call. Contact Detective Maria Santos at the local police department. Hand over the evidence. Let the system do its work. She would be free. Her daughter would be safe. Justice would be served. Grace sat in her car in the garage of her $5 million prison, her hand hovering over her phone, ready to dial. She could see the end. She could taste freedom. And then she heard Derek's voice through the door. "The brake lines need to look like normal wear and tear. Gradual failure. Mountain roads are perfect. Everyone will assume it was an accident. Make it happen before the baby comes. I want this done cleanly." Grace froze. Her hand dropped from the phone. Her blood turned to ice. He was not just cheating on her. He was not just lying about his identity. He was planning to kill her, and he wanted it done before she could give birth to their daughter. Twist destroys false hope. Every plan Grace had made crumbled in that moment. She could not go to the police. Not yet. Not when Derek was actively planning her murder. The moment he sensed anything was wrong, the moment he thought his careful plan might be exposed, he would accelerate the timeline. He would kill her before she could tell anyone anything. She could not run. Her car was probably already compromised. Any vehicle she took might be sabotaged, might be the death trap he was building around her. She could not tell her family. The moment they knew, they would act. Her father would send security, lawyers, investigators. Derek would see them coming a mile away, and then he would disappear. Or worse, he would decide to clean up every loose end before he vanished. Grace stood in the dark garage, 8 months pregnant, her hand pressed against her belly where her daughter kicked in blissful ignorance, and she understood something terrible. She might not survive this. All the evidence in the world would not save her if she was dead before she could use it. But maybe, just maybe, the evidence could speak for her, from beyond the grave. Chapter 6: The Dinner Party. 2 days after hearing Derek's murder plans, Grace received an announcement that made her blood run cold. "I am hosting a dinner party next Friday," Derek said over breakfast, scrolling through his phone with the casual confidence of a man who had no idea his wife knew exactly what he was. Important people, investors, business partners, people who need to see that Nathan Cross has a stable, happy home life. He looked up and smiled at her. "Can you handle it? I know you are tired with the pregnancy, but it is important for our future." Grace smiled back. "The performance of a lifetime." "Of course. I will make sure everything is perfect." She spent the next 5 days preparing, menu planning with the caterer, flower arrangements with the florist, seating charts that maximize networking opportunities. Everything a perfect wife would do for her successful husband. Everything a condemned woman would do while planning her own funeral. Because Grace had realized something in those dark hours after hearing Derek's phone call. She could not stop him from killing her. He had been planning for weeks, maybe months. The brake lines were probably already compromised. The accident was probably already set in motion. But she could make sure his victory was hollow. She could make sure that when she died, she took him down with her. She spent every spare moment over those 5 days building her legacy, recording videos that documented everything she knew, writing letters to be opened after her death, preparing evidence packages for Detective Santos, for Henry Morrison, the family attorney, for Rachel, creating a trap so intricate that Derek would walk into it while celebrating his triumph. And still, she hosted his dinner party. The guests arrived at 7 o'clock, 12 people in total, investment bankers, real estate developers, a tech entrepreneur who wanted to partner on a new project, their wives and girlfriends, wearing designer gowns and expensive jewelry, air-kissing cheeks and complimenting the house. Grace greeted them in a navy blue silk maternity dress that cost $1,800, her grandmother's pearls around her neck, her wedding ring, a 5-carat diamond that suddenly felt like a handcuff on her finger. She was perfect, gracious, charming, the ideal hostess with the ideal life. And then Amber Sinclair walked through the front door. Disappointment peak 3. Grace felt her smile freeze on her face. Amber was stunning. Of course she was. She wore an emerald green cocktail dress that probably cost as much as a used car. She moved with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly how beautiful she was and expected the world to acknowledge it. Derek stepped forward smoothly, his hand finding the small of Amber's back with practiced ease that told Grace this was not the first time they had appeared together in public. "Everyone," Derek said to the gathered guests, "I would like you to meet Amber Sinclair. She is the interior designer helping us redesign our downtown office building. Brilliant work. Absolutely brilliant." Grace extended her hand, her hostess smile firmly in place. "Lovely to meet you. Nathan has told me so much about the project." Their eyes met. Something flickered in Amber's expression. guilt triumph. Perhaps both, mixing together into something ugly and complicated. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Cross. Nathan speaks so highly of you. I bet he does, Grace thought. I bet he told you I was cold, distant, that our marriage was already over in everything but name. I bet he told you exactly what you needed to hear. Dinner was a master class in torture. Grace sat at the head of the table, playing her role to perfection. She laughed at the right moments, asked questions that made the men feel smart and the women feel included, made sure every wine glass stayed full and every plate was never empty. And across the table, she watched. She caught the looks between Derek and Amber, quick glances when they thought no one was paying attention, hidden smiles behind raised glasses, their fingers brushing when passing the bread basket, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. They thought they were being discreet. They had no idea that Grace saw everything. Rachel was at the dinner too. Grace had insisted on including her, much to Derek's barely concealed annoyance. Halfway through the main course, Rachel leaned close and whispered in Grace's ear, "If I accidentally spill red wine on that woman's white dress, do I get arrested or awarded?" Grace almost laughed, almost broke character completely. "Definitely awarded," she whispered back. "But not tonight. Tonight we play nice." Rachel squeezed her hand under the table. "I am here. Whatever you need. I am right here." Grace excused herself after the main course, walked calmly to the powder room, locked the door behind her. Then she sat on the edge of the marble bathtub and let herself fall apart. Her hands shook, her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her mother's distress and protesting against it. She pressed her palm against her belly and counted. To 10, to 20, to 50. "It is okay," she whispered to herself and to Hope. "We are going to be okay. I promise you. Somehow, some way, we are going to be okay." She did not believe her own words, but she said them anyway. Then she fixed her makeup, smoothed her dress, checked her reflection one final time. Perfect, serene, unbreakable. She returned to the dinner table and finished her meal with Derek on one side and his mistress on the other. And she never let them see her break. Chapter 7, the last night, 3:17 in the morning. Grace sat at the kitchen table, writing the last of her letters. Derek was asleep upstairs, worn out from whatever he had been doing that day. Probably with Amber, probably finalizing the details of her murder. Grace no longer cared about the affair. The affair was the least of his sins. She had finished her letter to her parents an hour ago. "I need you to know I was not naive at the end. I knew what I was facing. I chose to spend my final weeks making sure he could never hurt anyone else. Please do not blame yourselves. Please do not let grief consume you. Build something in my name. Help someone. That is how you honor me." She had finished her letter to Rachel 30 minutes ago. "You always knew something was wrong with him. You were right. I should have listened. I am sorry I did not trust your instincts sooner. You are the sister I chose. Please take care of my parents. And please, Rachel, live fully. Fall in love. Go to Italy like we always plan. Do not let my death become your prison." Now she was writing her last letter, the hardest one, to Hope. "My darling girl, I may never hold you. I may never see your face or hear your first cry or watch you take your first steps. But I want you to know who your mother was. Not a victim, never a victim, a fighter. Someone who faced a monster and found a way to win, even if she did not survive the battle. Never let anyone trap you. Never let anyone make you small. You come from strong women. Hope. Women who built empires and survived heartbreak and loved fiercely even when loving was dangerous. You were so wanted. From the very first heartbeat, you were so loved. If I am not there to tell you, let these words stand in my place. Your mother loved you enough to die fighting for your future. That is who I was. That is who you are. Never forget it. Grace sealed the envelope, added it to the stack she would give Rachel in the morning. Then she went to the nursery one last time. The room was perfect. Pink walls like the inside of a seashell. White furniture that gleamed in the moonlight coming through the window. A mobile of butterflies hanging over the crib, each one hand painted in colors she had chosen herself. She had spent 3 months preparing this room, imagining the life that would happen here. First words, first steps, late night feedings and lullabies and all the beautiful ordinary moments of motherhood. Now she might never see any of it. She sat in the rocking chair Derek had helped her assemble. Let the darkness hold her. Let the silence wrap around her like a blanket. I am not afraid, she whispered to the empty room. I have made my peace with what is coming. And strangely, terrifyingly, she realized it was true. She had done everything she could, prepared for every possibility, built a trap that would survive her, even if she did not survive him. Now all she could do was wait and hope. The next morning, Grace drove to meet Rachel. Coffee, pastries, a sunny autumn day that felt like mockery. I need you to hold on to something for me, Grace said, pressing a thick envelope into Rachel's hands. Do not open it unless something happens. Do not tell anyone you have it. Just keep it safe. Rachel's face went pale. Grace, what is going on? What do you mean unless something happens? Maybe nothing. Maybe I am being paranoid and everything will be fine. But you do not believe that. Grace was quiet for a long moment. I believe Derek is dangerous, she said finally. I believe I have gathered enough evidence to destroy him. And I believe that if anything happens to me, this envelope contains everything the police will need to put him in prison for the rest of his life. Rachel's hands shook as she took the envelope. Then come with me, right now. We will go to my apartment. You will stay there until the police can arrest him. I cannot. Why not? Because my car might already be compromised. Because Derek has people watching me. Because the moment he suspects I know anything, he will accelerate his plans. Grace touched her belly. I have maybe a few days, a week at most. If I can get through this, if I can deliver hope safely, then I can disappear. I have a plan. Money hidden where Derek cannot find it. A place to go. I just need a little more time. False hope, moment 2. For a few beautiful hours, Grace believed she might actually survive. Rachel helped her refine the escape plan. A rental car paid for in cash. A cabin in Vermont owned by Rachel's cousin, who asked no questions. A new phone, new identity documents, a whole new life waiting for her on the other side. She just had to make it through the next week. Derek left for a business trip that afternoon. 3 days, he said. Important meetings in Chicago. Grace almost laughed. She knew exactly what kind of meetings he was having. With Amber. With whoever he had hired to sabotage her car. But his absence gave her time. She spent the first day packing a go bag. Essential documents. Cash. The evidence files she had been building for weeks. Everything she would need to disappear. She spent the second day saying goodbye, visiting her parents without telling them why, hugging her mother extra long, memorizing her father's face. Just in case. She spent the third day waiting for Derek to come home, waiting for her chance to run. She had a plan. The moment he went to sleep that night, she would slip out the back door. Rachel would be waiting with the rental car 2 streets over. They would drive through the night to Vermont. By morning, she would be gone. By morning, she would be free. Twist destroys false hope. Derek came home a day early. Grace heard his car pull into the driveway at 3 in the afternoon. 24 hours before she expected him. 24 hours before her carefully planned escape. Hey, babe, he called from the front door. Meetings got canceled. Thought I would surprise you. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, smiling, charming, carrying flowers. For you, he said, presenting them with a flourish. I know things have been stressful with the pregnancy. I wanted you to know I appreciate everything you do. Grace took the flowers, smiled, kissed his cheek. They are beautiful. Thank you. Inside, she was screaming. Her go-bag was upstairs, hidden in the back of her closet. Her escape plan was ruined. Her window of opportunity had slammed shut, and Derek was looking at her with something in his eyes she had not seen before. Suspicion. You seem tense, he said. Is everything okay? Just tired. The baby has been kicking all day. He nodded slowly. His eyes never left her face. You should rest. Take it easy tonight. I will make dinner. He had never made dinner, not once in their entire marriage. Grace smiled. That sounds wonderful. She went upstairs, hid in the bathroom, texted Rachel with shaking fingers. He is back early. I cannot get out. He is watching me. Rachel's response came immediately. What do you need me to do? Grace stared at the phone for a long moment. Then she typed the hardest words she had ever written. Be ready. If anything happens to me, everything is in the envelope. Detective Santos, Henry Morrison, my parents. You know what to do. She deleted the conversation, hid the phone, flushed the toilet to cover the time she had spent. Then she went downstairs to eat dinner with her husband, knowing it might be her last meal. Chapter 8. The trap is sprung. The morning of Grace's death was beautiful. October sun streaming through autumn leaves, the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive. She drove carefully through the mountain roads, checking her mirrors, her hands steady on the wheel. She had told Derek she was going to lunch with Rachel. He had smiled, kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun. She did not know if the brake lines had already been cut, did not know if today was the day or tomorrow or next week, but she knew it was coming. She had mailed the last of her evidence packages that morning. Detective Santos would receive hers tomorrow. Henry Morrison had his locked in a safe. Rachel had everything else. The trap was set. Now she just had to wait for it to spring. The mountain road curved ahead. Hairpin turns and steep drops. Beautiful views of valleys painted gold and red. She noticed the brakes felt soft, different. Her heart rate spiked. She pressed the brake pedal harder as the curve approached. The car slowed, but not enough. She yanked the steering wheel, felt the tires lose traction, heard the horrible screech of rubber on asphalt. The world began to spin. She thought about hope, about the name she had chosen for her daughter, about all the beautiful, ordinary moments they would never share. She thought about Rachel, who would find out in a few hours, who would open the envelope and understand. She thought about her parents, who would be devastated but hopefully not destroyed, who would build the foundation she had dreamed of, who would turn her death into something meaningful. And she thought about Derek, about the trap waiting for him, about the justice she would deliver from beyond the grave. I hope it holds, she thought as the car left the road. I hope it is enough. Then there was impact, metal twisting, glass shattering, and then nothing at all. Lesson 3. Your story can survive. You, Grace. Thornton died on a mountain road in October, but her story did not die with her. The packages she mailed arrived the next morning. Detective Santos opened hers at her desk, coffee growing cold as she read page after page of meticulously documented evidence. Henry Morrison retrieved his from the safe the moment he heard about the accident. He had known Grace since she was a child, had helped her draft her first will at 21, had helped her draft her last will 3 weeks before her death. Rachel opened her envelope in her apartment, alone, hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. They all understood what Grace had done. They all knew what came next. Now let us return to the funeral, to Derek walking in with Amber on his arm, to the red dress and the frozen silence and the horror on every face. What Grace's family did not know, what Derek certainly did not know, was that he was walking into a trap 9 years in the making. Every lie he had ever told, every person he had ever hurt, every murder he had ever committed, all of it was about to come flooding into the light, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Chapter 9. The Will Reading. 2 hours after the funeral, The family gathered in William Thornton's private library. Dark wood paneling absorbed sound and light. Leather chairs that cost more than most people's annual salaries. First edition books lining the walls. Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Faulkner. A fireplace dominated one wall, cold despite the chill outside. Above it hung a portrait of Grace painted when she was 25. Before Nathan. Before the lies. Before everything. William took his seat at the head of the room. Evelyn sat beside him, her hand finding his beneath the armrest. Rachel stood by the window, her arms crossed, her face carefully blank. Henry Morrison sat at the antique desk, folders and devices spread before him like weapons waiting to be deployed. And Nathan Cross settled into a guest chair with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was about to inherit a fortune. He was about to inherit something very different. The library door opened one more time. Detective Maria Santos walked in, badge visible, expression unreadable. "What is she doing here?" Nathan demanded. "This is a private family matter. Mrs. Thornton specifically requested her presence," Henry said calmly. She was quite explicit in her instructions. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Henry cleared his throat. "Before I begin the formal reading of Mrs. Thornton's last will and testament, I must inform you that she left specific instructions about how this should be conducted. She prepared several recordings in the weeks before her death. She asked that they be played in full, without interruption." He reached for a small device on the desk. "I should warn you, what you are about to hear may be disturbing." He pressed play, and Grace Thornton's voice filled the room. "Hello, everyone." Evelyn gasped. The sound of her daughter's voice, so clear, so present, so alive, after watching her coffin lowered into the ground just hours ago. "If you are hearing this, I am dead, and there are things that need to be said. Things I could not say while I was alive." A pause. The recording captured her breath, soft and measured. "Nathan, I want you to know something. I found out about Amber 6 weeks before I died." The room went absolutely still. "The affair, the lies, the hotel rooms you charged to our joint account, the jewelry you bought her while I was carrying your child. I knew about all of it." Nathan shifted in his seat. "I was not confused." The recording continued. "I was not paranoid. I was not suffering from pregnancy hormones or female hysteria or any other excuse you might have prepared. I was perfectly clear, more clear than I had ever been in my life. And while I was investigating your affair, Nathan, I found something much worse." Long pause. "I know who you really are. Derek." The color drained from Nathan's face like water from a broken glass. William leaned forward. Evelyn pressed both hands against her mouth. Rachel watched with grim satisfaction. "I found the passport in the name Derek Cole." Grace's voice continued. "I found the death certificate for Nathan William Cross, dated 9 years ago. Hiking accident in Colorado. Body never recovered. I found the photographs of 2 young men who went into the mountains together, and I know that only one came back alive." Nathan stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the hardwood. "This is insane. Someone has doctored these recordings. Someone is trying to destroy me." "Sit down, Mr. Cole," Henry said. His voice was ice. Nathan froze. "That is your real name, is it not? Derek Cole. Born in Toledo, Ohio, aged out of foster care at 18. Security appeared at the library door. 2 large men blocking the exit. Nathan looked at them, looked at William, looked at the faces around the room. He sat down. But the revelations were only beginning." Henry pressed another button. A screen descended from the ceiling. Virginia Cross appeared on the screen. 72 years old, elegant, trembling. "3 months ago," Virginia said, "a woman named Grace Thornton contacted me. She told me things about the man I thought was my son, things that made me sick." Her voice cracked. "I agreed to help her. I collected DNA samples from the man claiming to be my son. I sent them to 3 different laboratories." She held up documents. The results came back. All 3 labs agreed. The man I have been treating as my son for 6 years shares none of my real son's DNA. She held up a photograph. Two young men at a trailhead. This is my real son on the left. He died 9 years ago in those mountains. And the man who has been pretending to be him ever since is a stranger, a monster. The video ended. Nathan was breathing hard now. The charming mask had slipped. What remained was something feral. This is a setup. Those DNA tests were falsified. Virginia never liked me. She probably paid to have the results doctored. 3 independent laboratories, Henry asked mildly. With chain of custody documentation, expert witnesses prepared to testify. He shook his head. That is quite a conspiracy theory. Mr. Cole, the 3 consecutive catastrophic events. But the trap was not finished closing. There is more, Grace's voice said from the recording. Much more. During my investigation, I arranged for a prenatal DNA test. Our daughter is yours. Derek, 100% your DNA. But here is what else the test revealed. Your DNA was compared against national criminal databases. Standard procedure in some states now. There was a match. Nathan stopped breathing. Evidence collected at the scene of an armed robbery in Henderson, Nevada, 14 years ago. A robbery where a security guard named Thomas Whitmore was shot and killed. You were never caught because there were no surviving witnesses. No DNA match in any system. Until now, Catastrophe 1 hit the room like a bomb. Nathan had not just killed Nathan Cross. He had killed someone else 14 years before that, a security guard, an innocent man doing his job. The body count was growing. Henry closed his folder. Mrs. Thornton's documentation has been forwarded to the Nevada District Attorney. The case has been reopened. A warrant has been issued. Nathan lunged to his feet. This will not hold up. My lawyers will tear this apart. Perhaps, Henry acknowledged, but there is something more immediate to address. The library doors opened again. A woman walked in, mid-40s, professional but haunted. This is Patricia Chen, Detective Santos said. Linda Foster's sister. Nathan's face went gray. Catastrophe 2. My sister disappeared 6 years ago, Patricia said, her voice shaking with controlled rage. Right around the time you showed up at Virginia Cross's door, pretending to be her dead son. Linda told me she was scared of her husband. Told me he was not who he said he was. Told me she was planning to leave. Then she vanished. Patricia stepped closer. Her daughter was 3 years old when you took her mother. She is 9 now. She still asks when mommy is coming home. Nathan said nothing. His silence was a confession. We found emails on Linda's old computer, Patricia continued. She was about to go to the police, about to expose everything, and then she disappeared. The room was silent. 2 murders, maybe 3, a lifetime of lies and stolen identities and broken families. All of it exposed by a pregnant woman who had 3 weeks to live and spent every moment making sure justice would survive her. But there was one more catastrophe to come. Detective Santos stepped forward. We examined your wife's vehicle yesterday, Mr. Cole, based on a letter she sent me before her death. She held up evidence photographs. The brake lines were cut, professionally, made to look like gradual wear. If we had not known exactly what to look for, we would never have found it. Catastrophe 3, Derek Cole, Santos said, pulling out handcuffs. You are under arrest for the murder of Grace Thornton. You are also under arrest for the suspected murder of Nathan William Cross. And Nevada has a warrant for you on armed robbery resulting in death. She began listing charges: identity fraud, financial fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. The list went on and on. Nathan fought, twisted against the guards, screamed threats that no one cared about. You think you have won? He snarled at William. Grace was a fool. She could have had everything. All she had to do was look the other way. William Thornton stepped forward, face to face with the man who murdered his daughter. My daughter was braver than you could ever understand. She knew she might not survive you, and she spent her final weeks making sure that if she died, you would not survive her." He leaned close. "That is who you lost to, a pregnant woman with 3 weeks to live. She destroyed you anyway." The door closed behind Nathan. The room exhaled, and Grace Thornton's final message played. Chapter 10. The Legacy. "Derek, I want you to understand something." Grace's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "I know you are going to prison. I know you will spend the rest of your life in a cell. But that is not my revenge. My revenge is this. The foundation in my name will help thousands of women escape men like you. Every grant, every rescue, every survivor who rebuilds her life. That is your legacy, not what you stole, what you accidentally created by destroying me. You wanted the Thornton fortune. Instead, you built a machine that will dismantle men exactly like yourself, forever. I did not just beat you, Derek. I turned you into a weapon against everything you are. Enjoy the irony." The trial began 6 months later. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Grace's recordings, authenticated by forensic experts. Virginia Cross's testimony about the DNA results. Patricia Chen's testimony about her missing sister. Detective Santos's explanation of the sabotage brake lines. The defense tried to paint Grace as unstable, paranoid, a pregnant woman driven to delusion by hormones. The jury did not buy it for a second. They saw a woman who gathered evidence while knowing she might be killed. A woman who prepared for her own death with meticulous precision. A woman who faced a monster and refused to be silenced. They saw a hero, guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Derek Cole was led away in orange shackles. The charming con man had nothing left to say. Amber Sinclair was arrested 4 days after the funeral. Accessory to fraud, obstruction of justice, possible accessory to murder. She claimed she did not know about the killings. Text messages on her phone proved otherwise. 5 years in federal prison. 1 year later, the Grace Thornton Foundation had helped 417 women escape fraudulent marriages. Rachel was executive director. She had quit her nursing job the day after the verdict. The first grant went to a woman named Maria, whose husband had a secret second family in another state. She used the money to hire a lawyer, find an apartment, and start therapy for herself and her children. Maria wrote a letter that Rachel framed and hung on her office wall. The money helped, but the most important thing was knowing I was not alone, that someone believed me, that what happened to me was real and wrong and not my fault. Grace Thornton saved my life, and I never even met her. William built a memorial garden on the estate. Roses Grace had loved. Milkweed for the monarch butterflies she always watched for in autumn. A small fountain in the center, its gentle sound masking the noise of the world. He came there every morning. The foundation helped another 15 women this month. He told the headstone, "We are expanding to California next. Your mother is chairing the annual gala." He touched the stone. "You would be proud, sweetheart. You would make fun of me for being sentimental, but you would be so proud." A monarch butterfly landed on the headstone. Late in the season, should not have been there at all. It rested for a moment, wings slowly opening and closing. Then it flew toward the sun. William smiled through his tears. "Show off. You always had to have the last word." 3 years later, Rachel sat in a cafe in Florence, wine in hand, pasta on the table, the Duomo visible through the window. David, her husband of 18 months, had just texted a photo of their dog back home. She smiled at her phone, at the simple, ordinary happiness she had thought she would never feel again. She pulled out a worn letter from her purse, Grace's final words to her. Read so many times the paper was soft as cloth. Fall in love. Go to Italy. Eat too much pasta and drink too much wine. Let yourself be happy. Do not let my death become your prison. Rachel raised her glass toward the window, toward the sky, toward wherever Grace might be watching. "I am happy. Ellie. Really, truly happy." just like you asked. She drank, and somewhere, somehow, Grace smiled. Final lesson. Your voice matters. Here is what I want you to take from Grace Thornton's story. Your voice matters. Even when you think no one is listening, even when you feel small and trapped and powerless, even when the world seems designed to silence you, Grace could not escape her marriage alive. The prenup made sure of that. The isolation made sure of that. The monster she had unknowingly married made sure of that. But she found another way. She documented everything. She prepared for every possibility. She made sure her truth would survive, even if she did not. And because of that, justice was served. A serial killer was stopped. Hundreds of women were saved. Not revenge, never revenge. Rescue. That is the lesson. That is what Grace Thornton's life and death can teach us all. You are never as powerless as you feel. There is always something you can do. Some evidence you can gather. Some ally you can trust. Some truth you can preserve. The predators of this world count on your silence. They count on your shame. They count on you believing that no one will listen, no one will help, no one will care. Prove them wrong. Speak your truth. Document your evidence. Build your case. And if the worst happens, if you cannot save yourself, make sure your story survives. Make sure your voice echoes long after you are gone. That is how we fight back. That is how we win. And that is the story of Grace Thornton, a woman who turned her darkest moment into her greatest victory. If this story moved you, if you felt your heart racing during those revelations, if you found yourself cheering for Grace from beyond the grave, then I have a small favor to ask. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what hit you hardest. Was it the red dress at the funeral, Derek's unmasking Grace's final message to the man who killed her? I read every single comment, and I love hearing what resonates with you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. A friend going through a difficult time, someone who needs to know that even in the darkest situations, there is always a way to fight back. And if you or someone you know is trapped in a dangerous relationship, please know that help exists. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. You are believed. You matter. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Your support means everything. Until next time, remember this: the truth always finds its way into the light. Always.